What is it about tax evasion that makes you think it gets easier to raise money from it as you go on?
I'll let David answer, but principally because international cooperation is stepping up very considerably, and that's where you get some of the real big bucks from this, and that is actually becoming easier and is happening faster than it was even a few years ago. David?
Yes, and look, if your proposition was right, we wouldn't be able to find any money in tax avoidance revenues because governments would have sorted it out long ago. The sad fact about our tax system is it's very open to abuse. It's been made more complicated by many Chancellors of the Exchequer over time, including under the Labour government. It gives huge opportunities, therefore, for people with very good accountants, either corporates or private individuals, to avoid paying their tax. And what we're proposing here is against the baseline of achievement with a coalition government, with a Tory Chancellor of the Exchequer, who hasn't, frankly, often been very willing to chase down those people on high incomes who are avoiding their tax. So what we're proposing, instead of the £2 billion that we've been able to achieve in this Parliament in tax avoidance each year, is £3.5 billion in the first year, and instead of the £4 billion or so in the second year, £7 billion. And I would be embarrassed, frankly, if we didn't put in our manifesto a more ambitious target than for tackling tax avoidance than George Osborne has managed to deliver in his time as Chancellor, even being chased down every day by Dowling Alexander on this point. There are also some concrete things that you'll see in our costing document and in our manifesto that's going to be unveiled later on this week that will help us, not only making sure that we better resource the high value part of HMRC that chases down those companies and individuals who do use avoidance very often, where the returns from investment in people are very high, but also moving to a general anti-avoidance rule in taxation, both for individuals and corporates. So it becomes much more difficult for individuals and corporates to do what they've done for the last 30, 40, 50 years, which is every time the government puts in one anti-avoidance measure, they find something else clever to do, so they're ahead of the government. And we have to stop this process of finding one loophole after another with the government chasing 3 years behind. Having a general anti-avoidance rule gives us the opportunity to do that. And we actually think that these estimates that we've put in are on the modest and cautious side. We would hope to do even better than that in government.
Okay. Starting here and we'll go back. Yeah. David.
David Hughes from the Press Association. The figures indicate you plan to raise more than 1.2 billion from motorists through changes to the vehicle excise duty. Is this a new war on motorists? And also, could you explain what the changes to universal credit will mean for the strivers you say you want to protect?
Sure. Very quickly on the vehicle on the duty on vehicles, we're simply wanting to retain. It's a sort of revenue retention measure. We simply want to retain the same amount of money from the overall vehicle duty system as we set out in 2010. That's, by the way, something that both parties agreed to back in 2010. So it's just to make sure that as you know, as the sort of system shifts around a bit, as people are buying lower emission vehicles, we still nonetheless generate the same revenue. So it's kind of maintaining that, if I can put it, the same sort of status quo in terms of revenue raised. And on universal credit, it's relatively straightforward. We're just simply saying that the savings, not pensions, not mortgages, but the savings that you might have, sort of disposable savings, if I can put it like that, before you are entitled to access universal credit, will be brought down from £16,000 to £10,000. Anyone who has £10,000 of sort of liquid savings in their bank, you would have thought are not the kind of people who necessarily need to have universal credit. We'd also scrap the so-called 30-hour rule, and both of those, I think, are for those who are receiving tax credits in the run-up to universal credit over the next couple of years. And we think that is perfectly fair and doable. Unless you want to add anything.
Jake Smeaty from the Daily Mirror. Can I ask about this second part of your slogan, A Fairer Society? The Institute for Fiscal Studies has said that the tax and benefit changes by the coalition have hit the poorest households the hardest, and the bottom 10. All the analysis shows that after the top 10, the bottom 10 perform the most at this. Can you say, hand on heart, that any of the measures you've announced today would reverse that?
I think first your assertions are wrong, but anyway, David.
Yes, I mean, 2 points. Just firstly, you did, I think, correct this during your question, so I started shaking my head, and then you mentioned that actually the people that have done worst under the coalition government, who've paid the highest price in terms of fiscal consolidation, are actually the richest, 5 to 10%. And that's because we've gone on pushing those people. But our idea of delivering fairness is not just the old Labour idea, the Gordon Brown idea, of more and more means-tested benefits, which actually end up being a barrier to people standing on their own 2 feet and getting into work. Our vision is an opportunity vision, and that's why about the investment that we've made in this Parliament, in things like the pupil premium, are about giving young people the skills and qualifications to do well in life, get into work themselves and not be reliant on the state. And also why the reforms that we've made to taxation, the increase in the personal tax allowance, have been linked to a massive expansion of employment, even at a time of modest economic growth. And we are very clear that the opportunity and fairness we're going to create is not the opportunity and fairness to be dependent upon the Chancellor of the Exchequer or a future Gordon Brown. It is actually to have the skills, abilities and employment opportunities to do well in and of your own right. And we'd expect to see those changes making a big impact over time. They already are, obviously, in the labour market.
Just the only thing I would add is just because I read fairly frequently people say, raising the personal allowance, raising the point at which you pay income tax isn't fair. Well, of course, it's just obvious that raising the personal allowance further from 10,600 to 12,500 is not going to help people who don't already pay income tax. Self-evidently not. But to say that someone on 15,000 or 18,000 or 19,000 or 21,000, they don't feel remotely rich, but will benefit massively from having hundreds of pounds put back in their pocket through the further raising of the allowance, that is somehow not a fair thing to do. I mean, go and ask them. I think someone on £18,000 would think it's a great thing, and then they get several £100 back in their pocket. That's just the point that statistics can sometimes lead you to slightly odd conclusions. Yeah.
I'm Beth Rigby from the FT. Mr. Clegg, you talked a lot in your speech about the Conservatives and the Labour Party not being clear about their tax and spend plans. But what we do know is clear about the Liberal Democrats is at best you will be in a coalition with one or two of these parties. So my question is, voters will no doubt want to know what your red lines are in any coalition negotiations. And with the announcement today, to follow up on Nick's question, is inheritance tax a red line for you? Will you oppose it in a coalition with the Conservatives? And will you be insistent on a mansion tax?
So I'll tell you what we will be insistent on, is the overall economic strategy. I'm not going to get into red line language just because I think it sort of mangles everybody up a bit, but we will be totally insistent, as we have been over the last half a decade, that as we finish balancing the books, we've got to do so on time, not do what Labour proposes, which is basically do it at a much more leisurely pace. I mean, it's a bit like Labour's approach. It's a bit like you pulled 3/4 of a plaster off, and then they want to take a long time pulling the rest of it off. Why extend the pain? Why extend the period of time during which there are cuts, when we know we can, in a reasonable time frame, by 2017-18, get the job done? So, the message to Labour is, we really think it is important that the British people should feel they have light at the end of the tunnel, and not do what Labour wants to do, which is basically constantly, to the mañana, wait until some ill-defined date in the future about when you actually finally clear the decks. I think our kids and our grandkids are entitled to know when this generation is finally going to wipe the slate clean. So for Labour, that is really important for us. And equally, what is very important for us, and our message to the Conservative Party is, we would of course not allow them, as we haven't over the last 5 years, to inflict this ideological approach to balancing the books, which is willfully regressive, which almost deliberately appears to be a plan to make the poorest poorer. We haven't allowed that to happen in the last 5 years, so of course we wouldn't allow it to happen in the future. And as you will see when we publish our manifesto, the first line on the front page of our manifesto, and as I explained earlier, we have treated the front page of our last manifesto as something akin to a tablet of stone. And what will be the first line on the front page of our manifesto, our first priority is to balance the books on time and do so fairly. Anybody else? Right, one more, two more.
Kevin Schofield from The Sun. With the opinion polls still refusing to shift and pointing to essentially a dead heat between the Conservatives and Labour, can you clarify for us who you're more likely to deal with? Is it the party with the most seats or the party with the most votes? And one final thing, forgive me if this is in your document, but can you rule out any increases in fuel duty if the Lib Dems are in a coalition as a way of sort of wringing more money out of road users?
Well, David can take the second question, because we've set out the approach we take on vehicles already. It's in the document. Look, on the first, I think you're right to say that it is becoming very obvious to the whole country, though Ed Miliband and David Cameron will furiously try and pretend otherwise, that neither of them are going to win the election. So actually the really interesting question for the latter stages of this election campaign is not, are Ed Miliband or David Cameron going to be Prime Minister? Because one of them will be Prime Minister. It's like, who's going to accompany them into government? Now, do you want a hapless minority Tory administration basically dancing to the tune of the sort of swivel-eyed brigade on the right wing of the Tory backbenches, dancing to the tune of UKIP? Do you want a hapless Labour minority administration dancing to the tune of Alex Salmond and basically doing what Nicola Sturgeon tells them to do? Or do you want the continuity and the coherence and the stability and the strength and the fairness of having Liberal Democrats back in government to keep the government anchored in the centre ground? And that's why I think actually, as David said, whilst a lot of this detail is quite technical, actually what this embodies is a centre ground approach of finishing the job and finishing it fairly. And we will be making the case that the last thing this country deserves or needs is a lurch to the right and the left, and a lurch to instability and uncertainty. It will undo a lot of the very hard work we've done to get the economy into better shape. As for who, look, as you know, I think just on a sort of democratic principle, if no party wins the election outright, which seems very likely, nonetheless, I think the party which has got the biggest mandate, most seats and most votes, has got the right to try and assemble a government. You're then going to ask people, what about a possible photo finish? I'm just not going to get into, I'm a campaigning politician. I'm not a soothsayer. I don't have a crystal ball. I happen to think the British people generally give, if they don't give someone an outright majority, nonetheless give the politicians a fairly strong steer about who's nonetheless in the lead. So I don't think there's much point speculating on these endless Rubik's Cube worth of sort of combinations about what may or may not happen if there's a photo finish. Sure. Oh, sorry, did you want us to say?
Yeah, I mean, our plans, both in the manifesto and here today, don't include any measure to increase fuel duties, and we've also been clear, and will be again later on this week, that we've got no plans either to increase the standard rates of VAT, national insurance or income tax.
Or corporation tax.
Or corporation tax.
Jake.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask you, you're talking about this being necessary pain and that these are sacrifices you're asking the British people to be patient with you on, if you like. And then at the same time, Mr. Clegg, you assert that the departmental spending cuts are easily manageable. Isn't that having it both ways?
No, because I think actually what people want to know about their own circumstances, for them individually and for their families, is what we've set out today. What does it mean for taxation? Who pays more, who pays less tax? What does it mean for people who receive support from the state? Who receives more, who receives less? What we do in Whitehall, year in, year out, as we have done over the last half a decade, I'm not pretending it's easy, but I really do think a comprehensive spending round which aims to deliver half in terms of departmental spendings of what we've done just in this financial year is manageable. And I've sat around the table with David Cameron, George Osborne and Danny Alexander for 5 years now, where year in, year out, we have found considerably more in departmental savings than that which we're planning to deliver as part of this balanced mix to balance the books by 2017, 2018. Okay, with that, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.